Hello and welcome to the Bookish Rambles podcast with me, Holly.
And me, Becky.
And today is a writing episode, and we had a bit of trouble because, oh my god, it's very ironic that I'm having trouble speaking because today we're talking about dialogue. Which I suppose that is something that we can talk about to begin with, which is that the both of us, and you mentioned this last time, or whenever we were talking about it, whether it was, I don't know if we recorded it, the conversation that we had, but I'm autistic. That's an official diagnosis that I have. I also have anxiety, which does lead into social anxiety. And you yourself have mentioned that you hate small talk.
Yes. So it's very I just don't think it's, I don't know, there's a speculation that I may be neurodivergent, but as I've had conversations with people and they have kind of pointed it out, but I'm like, it's not going to change anything, really.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just speculating. But yeah, for one of the examples, if I'm in a conversation, I will not, if it's something I am not interested in, I will not talk. I just do not care.
I know. It is kind of interesting because, obviously, as writers who have to write dialogue, because it's very rare that you'll find a novel that has no speech in it. I don't even know if there is a novel that has no speech, actually.
I believe there is. There is. I remember having this. There is a book, but I cannot tell you what it is without looking it up.
So it is a thing, which, okay. But I think it's very rare, especially I have seen, I think this is something that plays into a discussion we've had before about book talk and the way that readers' expectations are shifting depending on what's popular. And I think that there is a quippy banter is something that has become very popular in stories. People are like, oh, there's so much banter, it's great. Which, I mean, I don't personally care. I think I would read a book that didn't have any speech. I don't necessarily, the only thing for me is that if it's very poor speech, I will be like, that is so unrealistic, and that will deter me. But I'm wondering if perhaps that is one of the reasons why it's so unusual that speech isn't in books anymore, because it's one of those things that a lot of people are like, well, if it has, this connection between these characters where they're making all of these statements to each other.
Well, it's like with the writing books. There's books that have too much dialogue, I feel.
Yeah.
And I think the argument for that is to say that people write a script. But
yes.
When you're writing a script, yes, a lot of it is speech, but you still have to know how to write directions and things, because scripts are a very specific format to how they have to be written, which is why maybe people turn towards going towards books, because they're like, oh, I can have my characters do this, I can describe my characters doing this, instead of, I don't know, in a script format it would be this character walks to this side of the room, they grimace, and then they begin to speak. Meanwhile, you can put a bit more description in. I think that's why people tend to go towards books. But if you wanted to write scripts with dialogue, I know some people are really good at writing dialogue, write a script, write a screenplay.
Yeah.
I know it's hard, but you've got to use those skills. That is one thing when I did my bachelor's, we had to do a script, and I really enjoyed, a screenplay, writing the little screenplay. It was about World War One and about going over the top. And I just really enjoyed it, writing it, because I could just focus on the characters talking. So I think it's a really good exercise if you want to practice your dialogue, personally.
Yeah. To write a scene that's very dialogue heavy. I do think that I agree with that. And I guess the reason why I mentioned that in the first place is because, I always am quite conscious of how much speech I'm using. I definitely try to offset the conversations I have with more introspection from the characters, with descriptions of the setting and whatnot, which is one of the things that I would say, gotten a bit more comfortable with over the past few months, where I've been capable of describing setting a bit more and whatnot. And obviously, I say obviously, that I'm rewriting my novel that I'm querying.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm doing with that is I'm adding a bit more description, trying to make it a little bit more visual for the people, because it's hard for me because I don't have a visual brain, which I think it's called aphantasia. So it's hard for me, but that it definitely is something that I've been doing more, and that with the dialogue sort of stuff, it definitely has come to my mind more that like whenever I have a very dialogue heavy thing, like maybe a page or two of dialogue, which in an actual novel probably wouldn't be so many pages because it's obviously 2 times line spacing and whatnot, blah blah. But I do then follow it up. But I think that just because you've got to find that balance, it also doesn't mean that you should. And I guess this is the thing, is that when you're writing dialogue, and specifically when you're writing natural, believable dialogue, which I don't know if you remember, but I did get a comment from at least one person who said that my dialogue was quite believable. But I feel like you have to not be afraid of going on a little bit long, because some conversations do go on for a while.
Yeah, I found what's really interesting is because obviously, like, I think with dialogue, it's very different compared to like normal speech because no one pauses and then speaks. Real conversations are interrupted. And like, you might butt in. It's just a natural thing, isn't it? So like, if you were to write, don't they say not to put a lot of and pauses in dialogue when you're writing on the book? Because if you're trying to reflect real life speech, it just feels a bit jarring. Because if you're reading, like for example, because I know I use a placeholder a lot, like and for the Americans, that's just our version of I wouldn't write that into my book because I would get tired of reading that because it would feel like the person just keeps pausing. Because I think what's the word I'm looking for? It slows down the pace.
I think it's like if you put like a few of those words, you get the idea that that's how that character speaks. And in your head, you maybe do it yourself. Like, okay, tip number 1, I don't know if anyone else does this, and obviously you're the only other person around who can answer, but I read the speech that I'm writing in the accent and like the voice of the characters in my head. So like,
I mean, I can't do accents, so I will act it out.
But okay, so on the interrupting thing, I obviously don't do that a lot because it's very difficult to write that without it being a nightmare to read. I have an argument between Natasha and Joel where she says, "You have no," and then it cuts off, and then he says something, and then it goes back to her saying, "No idea what you're talking about." So to give the idea that he's cutting into what she's saying, right?
Yeah, see, I think that's the way it should be done, because if you're just constantly writing, if you were constantly doing it, I think that would be like, yeah, it's just, I think it makes it unique as well if you use it. Yeah, it makes it unique if you do it little by little, doesn't it?
But let me find, it'll be in literally chapter 1. So for example, there's a character, his name is Al, he's from Monaco, which basically means that he speaks French, and it's a variation of a French accent because Monaco for a long time was a part of France. So whenever he speaks, I'm trying to find the conversations. So I imagine his voice kind of, I mean, it's my voice doing an accent, but I'll be like, would he say it this way? Would he, as a man who, English is his second language, who lives in a French-speaking country and therefore only hears English when he's at work, would he actually say this word? Would he know this word? It's like how there's a metaphor for ice skating, and she mentions a Zamboni, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's the thing that comes out and smooths over the ice. And so he doesn't know what that word means, because why would he? He's not English. It's a very weird word. I don't feel like I knew that word for a really long time. So like, why would he? And so for me, that's something that I do, is I'll just try and figure out if it sounds natural for them, as well as just generally like, is this how people talk? Because people talk differently. And I think that, if you have somebody who isn't naturally, if they're speaking a language that they're not that familiar with, maybe their grammar would be a bit more formal. Maybe they would get a bit confused and use a slightly different word. And you don't want to overdo that stuff, but I think that it helps when you're constructing a conversation to make sure that they sound different and that they sound different in a way that is authentic to them.
Yeah, so I think especially because the way people speak, you've got to make them unique, haven't you? So if like with my writing, well, like Evan, he's the only person in my book that uses the word mate.
Yeah.
He's more of the Britishisms, so to speak, but that's more of his personality. I think the way people speak ties into their personality as well.
Oh, and you've got like, you know what we've mentioned before, you've got like the class dynamics, but you've got, obviously, I think we've spoken about this, but class influences the way that you speak, the language that you use, the letters that you pronounce or don't pronounce.
Yeah, like accents and things.
Yeah.
To be fair, obviously my book is set in the north, but I am not writing I'm not writing in a northern accent because I generally don't know how I would break that down.
I think as well the problem with that is that unless you're, because I think Train Spotting and, you know, there are a few other books where they're written with like the dialect, so that unless you know the accent, you're going to be reading it and you're like, that's just letters, that's not a word. And I get it in that sense, because obviously that's a heritage thing. It's like, this is the accent, this is the colloquial way of speaking, the slang. But I think for an average book that isn't specifically about place, it very much is about the words, the way that sentences are formed, like which word do they put in which order.
Everything is a conscious choice.
Yeah, and it's one of those weird things where you don't necessarily think when you're going into it. But at the same time, like sometimes it comes really naturally. Sometimes when you're editing, you look at it and you think, that is not something that they would say. But, I mean, I guess as well, like, this is, okay, nuance time. When characters are speaking to different people, the way that they sound is different.
Yes.
And the thing is as well,
that's hard to do as well.
Your characters, I definitely like have a sense of them as being individual people, and I think it was really interesting to see Penny meeting Derek's friends and her just starting to be kind of comfortable with Derek, and then having these new people that she doesn't know but who are being nice, and she's like, you know, she's new, but she's also, it's not like uncomfortable, it's just a slightly awkward first meeting sort of stuff. That, in my mind, it's one of those things where like, you did that really well.
Yeah, based on real experience, by the way, because have you ever been with your friend and then they know someone and it's just like really, like you just stand there until they're done. It's like the most awkward thing ever. That's what I mean. So it's based on real experience. Like yes, Penny is like awkward. So I did give Penny my awkwardness with people, I will admit, because I am awkward around people I don't know. I completely shut down. It takes me a while to warm up to people. And yeah, I just want to put that in, basically.
Yeah, and I think that you did it well. I think that you showed her sort of learning to open up a little bit with time, and I think it was really interesting because it's very subtle. Like, it's not, you don't say in the speech, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit awkward around people.
Well, no, because that's a bit like that'd be like first draft material.
Yeah,
like even tying down to the way dialogue acts, you have to give your characters the personality with the dialogue. So like, because she's awkward, but as soon as she comes out of the shell, she's like completely different. So
I guess as well, I'll use an example from my new book to sort of show what we mean with like an example, because obviously this is but I have these two characters who meet for the first time. For anyone who doesn't know Project Vampire, it's it's about a vampire and a human who fall in love, but to begin with, she just wants to drink his blood. And so when they first meet, she sees him as like food, whereas he sees her as this like pretty lady in a club, you know? So she is kind of being flirty, but in like a very fake, over the top way. And he's like kind of confident. So he's like, all right, well, I'll buy the next round then. And then when he's with his dad, to contrast that, they have a conversation where he's just like a mess. He doesn't really know what to say. He's kind of like, no, it's fine. Don't worry about me. Everything's good. And it's like the contrast between him with somebody that he doesn't know, with whom he can just put on airs for a few minutes, versus the people that he knows very well and who can read him like an open book. I think it's very like interesting to play with that dynamic. And then the same thing with the vampire, who, she wants to kill this guy, and so she's being very sweet, very open, pretending to be very open at least. And then we see her with her family, and she's just like a different person. She's like much more comfortable, much more natural. And like, it's interesting to do that as a writer, and to read it through and be like, actually, yeah. And maybe you don't even realize, like, I guess that's the thing as well, like, what draft do you feel like you have a grip on conversation?
I would say probably in like the second or third draft, because draft one is generally you just want to get everything out of you, don't you? And then you go in and then you're like, I'm going to edit this because this conversation doesn't sound right.
Yeah. You have like a vague idea of what you want, and then you're like, oh, but I want to write the next thing now. And so
yeah, so for like example, so you remember I suppose this is going to slight spoiler territory, but the conversation between Penny and Aban? Yeah, I believe it's chapter 8. So I believe, if I can find my old example, okay, so draft 1 did still have this argument between Penny and Aban, but the argument between them happens at the pond in draft 1.
Oh.
So yeah, this is very different. So it still happens. So in the new draft, obviously, she calls Aban. So I'll read the old version out, which I think the dialogue's still all right, but I think it's just a bit weird. So I'm going to have to read like the whole page because...
yeah, context.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to have to read this whole scene out. So basically they're on the pond and she's bought him a bagel. I might have to read a couple of pages out just because this is a gigantic version of it. Okay, so this is chapter 4. So I'll go from it. Penny squeezed the food bag in her hand and took a few steps towards him. I bought you a bagel, she said, opening the bag up. Aban stood staring at the water. She needed him to say something, anything, so she knew this wasn't a dream. Thanks, Aban said as he turned around. His eyes were looking away from her, but Penny could make out dark eye bags that she never remembered him having. She handed him the bag and took it with a nod. He didn't grab the bagel, but instead stared at the inside of it. Penny felt sick. Aban, she began, but faltered, not even sure of how this conversation would go or what would happen. I know, Penny, I guess it's my fault. I haven't seen you for a while, and I thought things might be able to go back to normal, but everything's changed, he said, and he grabbed the bagel. Nothing's changed, Penny blurted. However, the words were already out. Aban snapped his head up and let the bitter laugh that she hated. He only used that laugh when he was annoyed about something. Penny had never been on the receiving end of it before. Nothing's changed? He rubbed his hand over his face. Penny could hear the unspoken words waiting on his tongue, so she decided to finish them for him. You lost everything because of me. That's really what you wanted to say, isn't it? Penny snapped. Out of all the people, she had thought that Aban had been different, that he was on her side. But people were all the same, weren't they? She couldn't trust anyone. Penny, I'm not saying that, Aban replied. He turned around and began to walk towards her. Penny took a few steps back, going towards the thicket of the trees. You are, though, aren't you? She wasn't going to let her point die. Fine. You put the words in my mouth. I am tired of fighting, Miss Penny. I stuck up for you because I believed you. I still Penny held her hand up, interrupting him. You still believe me? When you're blaming me? You'd think that being for my so-called best friend you wouldn't be saying that, Penny. Penny could feel the tears brewing in her eyes. She wiped them quickly. She would not cry in front of Aban. Yes, Penny, but I'm tired of fighting you. Every time we try to talk about it, you snap. I'm tired because I want my friends back. I was talking to Rose the other day. Aban stopped staring and looked over at Penny. So, obviously there's still bits that are the same in this argument, if you recognise that bit.
Yeah.
So, obviously, the draft 1, there's a lot of, like, you believe me when you're blaming me, like, rhetorical questions almost. And when I wrote this, I was like, I want this to be the kind of the conflict. So, because there's a lot of dialogue for an argument here, because arguments tend to be quite short. So they're completely different. So this is like the most recent draft. and before it's copy edited, obviously. So I will read just the tiny bit out now compared to it. She selected Aban's name. Oh, so, okay, so for context, Penny is ringing Aban. She selected Aban's name, pressing call, and began to dial and dial. She let it ring, not left it, just noticed a typo. She let it ring for another moment before sighing. She reached for the end call button. There was a noise, and then Aban's voice drifted down to her ears. What do you want? His voice was monotone. Hello to you too. Aban sighed. I need to go. What's the matter with you? What have I done? There was a pause on the other end, and then another sigh. I'm tired, Penny. What? You heard me. Penny couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tired. All I asked for you was for you to hang out. How is that tiring? Because when we hang out, the past is always dragged up. Hang out? Hang out? We haven't hung out in months. This is just like how it was with the others. Penny scoffed and adjusted herself on the ground. There it is, the past. Penny didn't reply straight away. I'm trying to move on from it. You're the only person I have left. What if we could forget about everything? Try it again. I spoke to Rose the other day. Aban stopped speaking. So can you see a little difference, like how much tighter the dialogue is compared to like the back and forth here? You like the argument's short and sweet, but it still gets that same feeling across.
Yeah. And it's not like he's kind of talking in a theatrical way, like a villain's monologue type thing, where it's like, it's more like a conversation, well, an argument, but yeah, like what you said basically.
Yeah, it's tighter, and because it's for I think the conversation in draft one is very melodramatic.
Yeah, very like end of the world, but to be fair, it kind of is. It just, the words that they've used to express that feeling are a little bit more, I'm a teenager.
Yeah, and I'm not the 20-year-old writing a teenager.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, that is what draft one's for, though.
It's for getting the ideas so that you can make them actually what you wanted them to be later. I feel that way a lot with, honestly, just like everything with writing. I think it's really nice though with the dialogue, because I do agree. I think that it gets a lot stronger. I feel like
the more you edit.
Yeah, something that I have found quite difficult lately is night times. So okay, no, why did I just say that? I honestly don't.
Night times. I thought you were only going about say, oh, I've noticed I'm more awake at night time or something.
That's not at all what I meant. Okay, so I'm going to read you some dialogue. You'll see this and, oh my god. Did you hear the way I said that?
No.
I said this.
It's these. Got an accent going on there, speaking of accents.
No, you'll see this. But basically it's between two characters. I'm not going to say who for the sake of spoilers. But one of them says, why aren't you mourning him? And it's kind of out of nowhere. Like the whole point is it's like, I'm concerned about you and I feel like we're not addressing the elephant in the room, And then there's a little like half-size sort of paragraph about emotions and not quite understanding them when they're being displayed on somebody else. And then the person says, oh, this might be a spoiler, but basically you've never been in love. The only person that you've lost was this character. Again, I don't know how much I can say without spoiling, but then there's another bit where it's like, you don't know what I feel. I hope you never do and that you never have your heart broken, but I can't show you. I can't show this person or these people or this person. They're holding themselves together by refusing to accept the truth. You're holding yourself together by pretending I don't feel as bad about it as I do. And I don't blame you for it. I blame them and their insistence that we have to be hunted for the way that we survive. That's how I'm going to get through it. That's all. When you're ready to grieve, when I don't have to pretend everything will still work out fine, that's when I'll mourn him. And like, this is arguably the most serious conversation that the book's going to have. But like, this is obviously first draft, but it's really difficult. Hang on, I'll send you it so that you can see it without. But I feel like it's one of those things where like grief is really difficult for me to write because the only person that I've lost who was like a daily part of my life was my cat, which isn't quite the same as like losing a family member or like a close friend sort of thing. And I feel like that's something that I guess I want to talk about is, you know, we've mentioned that we both act out our conversations, because you act yours out, I act mine out in my head by giving them the voices of the characters and being like, was this realistic, blah blah blah. And I like to see interactions as well. Like I know some people won't like this, but in my sort of conversations I like to have little mentions to the things that they're doing with their bodies, like the drink that they're playing with, or the way that their sort of face is, because I think that those little things, they help me understand exactly the tone of the writing without having to say exactly what the tone is. But I quite like doing that because I can see how it would play out. I can see with some level of consistency, despite the fact that I do have a disability that impacts my social understanding. But I don't understand grief in the way that I necessarily sometimes will need to. And I think that's what really pushes me as a writer, is like when there's a situation that I can't understand any more than, like, you know, through sympathy, it's more difficult for me to write those conversations.
Yeah, I think especially obviously with someone who is completely on the opposite spectrum of having a lot of people pass away, about 5 or 6, and I think there is a difference in how you approach writing that personally. I don't know if you noticed would you say, have you noticed that the difference with mine, for example?
I mean,
I mean,
I feel like
I don't know how I'd clarify it, to be honest, but
you have that sense of, you show variety, which I like, of responses to it, which is normal. People have different reactions, they have different behaviors. I think for me, one thing that I mentioned was I love the grandmother's reaction, the way that she behaves.
yeah. And I think mainly that to do, obviously, I'm someone who has like lost a lot, as I mentioned previously. It's strange because the way I reacted, because it's funny, it's only certain things that upset you, because obviously my grandma passed away when I went to my cousin's wedding. I don't tend to think about it. That's how I get through things. I don't think about it, because if I do, I'll get mellow. But I saw a photo of her at my cousin's wedding, and that really set me off. And I was just like, why does this set me off? I think it's just the fact it was really nice, obviously, but it just set me off. Or
I mean,
even with pets, though, I think they really affect. Like my childhood dog, when she passed away, I saw a video of a dog acting the same. It was the same breed, and they did the same thing, and it just really set me off. I was like, I can't watch this.
See, I saw a picture of my cat that I must have sent it to my mum, so she sent it back to me one day randomly, and it was him sitting on a laptop, my mum's laptop, and I'd taken the picture because I was like, oh look, he's working, because the laptop was open, but next to him was a book that I had been reading, I think literally the month that he died, and the book was Flowers for Algernon, which, not to spoil, but basically I would describe that book as like reading about somebody with Alzheimer's from the perspective of the person with Alzheimer's. It is a horrible book. It's beautiful, but it's horrible to read. I was sobbing. I had to stop reading it. And my cat died because he had an illness that affected the way that he behaved towards the end, because he was trying to hide his pain in the way that cats especially tend to do. And so he was just different, and he smelled like the vets a lot of the time because he was in and out. And so I saw this picture of him with this book, and I just, you know, when your brain, I mean obviously you do because you've just described it, but like your brain does that thing where it's just like the grief suddenly is recontextualized and it hits you fresh, and it's just so weird and awful.
Yeah, well, my nan, she used to go B&M and buy, like, you know, the midget gem sweets. They're not actually midget gems, they're like the squishy gelatin ones.
Yeah.
I can't eat them anymore because I don't think they sell them anymore anyway, but I can't. Every time I think, yeah, I just can't. eat them anymore because every time I see them, I think of when she used to a whole pack, by the way.
I love the film Mamma Mia, and I love ABBA. But whenever
Hmm.
I hear All Last Summer, especially the version played in the film, I think about my dad. And I literally, as a kid, I would cry sometimes listening to that song because I was like, one day my parents are going to grow old and die. And that's awful to think about. And for some reason, as a kid, that was a huge worry of mine. But like, I just know, like, when I'm older, there's going to be a point where I'm not going to be able to watch that film ever again because I'm just not going to be able to sit through it. And like, it's so awful because, like, I know what you mean. I get, even though I've not experienced that, I am like aware of the fact that that's going to be true for me. And like, this is coming from someone who cried at Beverly Hills Chihuahua 2, okay? Like, and that's not even a joke. Like, I cried at that film.
Oh,
As
I
a
love
kid.
them. I think they're really good films, even though they're like kind of cheesy.
They're
I
kind
think
of
they're
awful, but in like a
cute.
good way.
It's like the Air Buddy movies.
Yeah,
Air Bud. I really liked the film Air Bud when I was a kid.
they're so cute. But like, it's that awareness of the fact that I'm a very emotional being who has a lot of nostalgia and a lot of connections with like this thing and this time of my life. And like, I don't get it from I've experienced it, but like, I get it because I know that it's going to be true. And I think in that sense, like, I don't know if you had a chance to read this, but obviously it is a first draft. I need to go through and make it more subtle. But I feel like it's one of those conversations where this is two people who love each other talking about something that neither of them are quite able to talk about, but that they have to talk about at some point. And it's like, it's a lack of tact on one of them's part because she's kind of just wanting to know for her own sake. But it's also like she feels a lot of guilt over it. And I don't know. I feel like it's a very complicated situation and one that I guess writing the dialogue around it and writing the dialogue for enemies to lovers, which this book requires, it's a new challenge that I haven't quite had to deal with before. Um,
That's a good thing if you're challenging yourself, though.
exactly. And I think it's okay to be bad because who knows how many drafts this book is going to have. Who knows if I'm going to be working with like an actual editor at the point, or an agent when this book is getting, a second draft treatment and whatnot. But I guess, is there anything that you struggle with in speech? Like, is there any emotion or, I don't know, like a situation that makes you just be like, ah!
I think in terms of obviously with my book, writing the radio shows,
Yeah, I
they're
oh my God.
hard.
When I tell you, like, I am so glad that Formula One doesn't have that much speech during the races. Because, like,
Yeah.
writing, like, I think in general, writing, like, a job is really difficult.
Well, yeah, because when I was writing them, I wanted to try and find out some examples of radio shows, but half the radio shows they just talk about absolute nonsense.
They don't
And
talk about the songs.
no, I was trying to find something similar. So I think I looked at YouTube videos where they were analysing the songs. So I was like, I'm going to use some of that. Like, the way Penny talks about the songs, like she talks about, I was like, I don't want them to talk about the composition and stuff because that's not what you listen to a radio for. You want to learn about the history. I believe there's a guy called, is his name Sideways? He talks a lot about the way music is in like Disney movies and stuff. I listen to a lot of him.
Do you know what I'll say
So
as
the
well?
way he,
If you ever want inspiration, because you're obviously editing right now, absolute 80s radio. They tend to talk, they'll be like, and that was that song by this band who were in this part of the 80s and they wrote this song for this album and blah, blah, blah. They tend to do some of that stuff. I will say that's
yeah,
like the only radio station that I've ever noticed that has
no,
done
that's
that.
which is what I've used a little bit. Obviously, I made it a bit different because that's not what I don't want to
Yeah.
use exact dialogue like that. So I've made it more like Penny would speak. And like on my developmental feedback, she said she really sounds like she knows what she's talking about. So I was like, well,
Take
if
that
someone
as
I
a
have no idea who this person, that my developmental editor, I don't know who she is, has said that, then yeah, I'll
brilliant.
take that then.
I do
So
think
yeah, that definitely that bit towards my book.
yeah.
I think in terms of like my uni dissertation, I think it's been like trying to find what they could speak about. It's finding things for the characters to talk about. That's what I struggle with a little bit, I think.
Yeah. Because the thing about conversation, I guess, is this is a slightly more educational one, I guess, because I've already given a tip. But I think the way that conversations are constructed, you have two people. Those two people have their own lives, their own experiences, their own, interests that they want to talk about, their own way of speaking. Plus, obviously, there are conversations that have more than two people, which I hate writing, by the way. I will do it, but I despise when I'm constantly having to clarify who is speaking because it makes it feel clunky.
It's hot. That's definitely the hardest part of writing dialogue when you've got a group conversation.
It was my nemesis with Formation Lab because, like,
I find we did an exercise on this actually on my course, and it was really hard. I did like this. You remember that balloon story?
Yes.
That I wrote ages ago. It was that. That was the. I don't know if you remember. I was talking about the exercise.
God, yeah.
That was hard. But I found kind of a trick that I use as writing action. So, like how in like the cafeteria scenes where Addy reached across, like have a dialogue first, and then it's like Evan held the container of chips above his head.
I fully do that as well.
I think that's a good tip to use.
Because there are 20 drivers. I don't mention all 20 of them. I actually think I mention 10, maybe by name at this point in this draft. But like, they obviously have to talk to each other sometimes in group settings. Let me go to this episode. Chapter. Because I know that this one...
This episode of Formation Lab, we are talking about Clem or something.
Honestly, if there was like a 20... Well, it would be 30 episode series of this as or maybe even just it could be like the season. I would
audiobook. 3 seasons is an audiobook podcast. I'm pretty sure those do exist,
They do. But okay, so this is an example of a conversation. I will read it out partly in full. So they're at a driver's parade. They're in a vehicle together, going around the track, basically forced to be there. And so there are 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that it? 4 or 5 people? Yeah, I think it's just 5 people, including the main character. So, this is the conversation. There's not a lot of attention on us, Henry says. The room is still filling and most people... Oh, no, sorry, this is an interview. Okay, I must have changed that. There's not a lot of attention on us, Henry says. The room is still filling and most people are checking over their notes. It's nice. I thought Formula 1 drivers were supposed to be egomaniacs, Martin says, dripping with sarcasm. My laugh punctures the silence. Only some of us. Present company included, Henry adds, nudging me with his elbow. Everyone cracks into laughter as the interviewer sits down. And then the interviewer is there and she's asking questions, and so she directs these questions at people. And so one of the drivers says, "We've been good this weekend. I think we have what it takes to win." Egomaniac, Tiago interrupts. And then so it's a group conversation, but they're either mentioned through the things that they do or they have little actions. I tend to do that a lot. That was still the unedited version as well, I will say. That's the version because that's a very late chapter. And I've only edited 1 chapter so far. It took me 4 days to do.
It takes time. So it's hard. So I've just been thinking about this. So I was beta reading for somebody, and I didn't notice this until I started editing, and I was watching, and I think I watched a YouTube video about some dialogue feedback, and a lot of what I used to do was put people's names in dialogue so you knew who they were speaking to, and that was such a bad habit. But when I was editing his work, I could see the same thing. The characters would address this and this, and I'm I think one of the feedback I gave to him was we don't need the dialogue names so much, because it feels a bit like,
hello,
this is a lot
Becky.
of names.
How are you doing?
Yeah. I'm fine, Holly. How are you doing, Holly? That's what I mean. It doesn't sound natural. No. So I think it is another first draft ism. I'm going to call them first draft isms because that's what they are.
And again, I guess that comes back to the paragraph that I have sent, where she says the full name, but then the next time that she says it, and the only other time that she really says it, she uses a nickname. She's like, this is a hard conversation, so she's like trying to call this person's attention. That's why it's mentioned. Otherwise, it wouldn't be used. Like, and I think that's important because, as well, so I have a character called Clementine. I think the only time that she is called Clementine is when my character's mother says to my main character, Clementine's an odd name. Why did she choose that name? Obviously not like that. That was more awkward. But like, she says the full name only because she's like, why did she choose that name? Out of curiosity. I've never asked. Probably has asked though, let's be real, parents and their forgetfulness. It would be really unnatural for my character who, like, she loves this person. She's not going to go around being like, yes, Clementine. Because why would you do that? How many times have I ever called you Rebecca?
I don't think so.
And like, if my name
was
something,
apart from Just, obviously, but
yeah, but like, if my name was something that wasn't very short in itself, you probably would still just be calling me Holly.
I mean, Hol is a nickname as well. Have you ever people called you Hol?
Yeah, and like, to be fair, a lot of people I know wouldn't say Holly to my name, like to my face even. Sorry. God, it really is an episode for me. This talking about speech has lost me all of my ability, but. Like, even my own parents, they mostly call me, like, nicknames,
Yes. So my friends call me Becky, right? My mum and dad and Sam call me Beck. And then people at work will call me Becky. Some people call me Becca, but most of it's Becky.
That's like the people who, if they were going to... So it really, I think that is one thing as well. But, like, I think that it really is, like, it's about figuring out, examining real conversations. I guess this is tip number 2, is to think about real conversations. Yes, speak them out like we said before, but also just use common sense. Would you call this person by this full name? Or would you, after a while of knowing them, eventually just be like, nickname, I'm going to call you this
nickname.
And if you're going to give someone a nickname, and this is my like gripe with some romance books, especially modern ones, they give nicknames and it feels very forced. And I know that you've written the book, obviously you forced it, but like, if you have a character and they have red hair and the main character, their love interest, is like gonna call them Red, that's just kind of cringy and too obvious, and I think unrealistic because of how like imagine calling somebody Red because they have red hair.
How are you doing, Red?
It's so stupid. Like, don't do that. Or like, if they remind somebody of an animal, so they call them the animal. Like, yeah, you could do that, but don't have it be because they have like a cute nose like a bunny or something. Don't call them Bunny because they, their nose wiggles when they get excited. Like, call them Bunny because they've got big ears. Have that be the reveal. Like, that's more realistic.
Yeah, see, I've got a friend called Georgia. I've known since I was 13. I call her G, not Georgie or anything. We call her G. Yeah. She hasn't even got 2 E's in her name. I have no idea whether it's a nickname. I just call her G, G-E-E. That's like how I spell it. I have no idea why I call her that. I can't remember why. There's a reason, but
it came up, and I think that's the thing. I was nicknamed Goose for a while because I don't.
Is that why your username has got Goose in it?
Because
now I know.
I have this laugh which comes out very, very rarely, but when I've been laughing for a while, my throat closes up, and it comes out like a honk. So that's why that came about, and it's not a flattering reason, but it kind of stuck. It was like, yeah, Goose. And so it just made sense. And I think like you have other nicknames that, I guess, to give an example, let's say that you were writing a romantic comedy. My book is about, as I mentioned, a vampire and a human. He calls her Usu. I think that's how you would say it, if I'm remembering correctly, U-S-U. And she's like, what the hell did you just call me? And he's like, chill out, it means bat, okay? In the language that his like family speak. Because his father is from, I think Nigeria is where he's from. So he speaks Igbo. like his name, his father's name, they're Igbo.
A cool name for a language, Igbo. I
I
like that.
know. It's such a cool language, and it's so interesting to like the characters' names in that book are very specific. Oh my god, we should do a thing about character names if we haven't already. Because I pick my characters' names a lot of the time based off of meaning. So I think it's really interesting. And we could talk about characters. Anyway, this is like planning stuff, doesn't matter. But basically, he calls her this word because it means bat, because she's a vampire. But it's less weird than just calling her bat, because it's like his second language. And so she's like, I don't love this nickname that you've given me, but if it makes you feel better about not killing me because I'm a vampire, then go ahead, you know? And like, it's kind of awkward, but it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be like him kind of making fun of her in a moment of weakness. You know, they're having a conversation where he's like annoyed at her, she's annoyed at him. And it evolves. Whereas I think if you give that kind of nickname in like a loving sense, it feels a lot more cringe to me. It's like, would you go up to somebody that you kind of have a crush on and call them a bat? No. But if there was somebody that you were annoyed with and you were making fun of them, you might, you know? Like,
I'm just imagining someone going around saying, "Oh, you look like you're a bat. Your name is Bat now." like it's just be such a random interaction. Be like, what?
yeah, exactly. Like, you get what I mean. And I feel like that's what is the thing, is like, if you give your characters a nickname based off of an attribute and they mean it as like an endearing thing right from the very beginning, it is more weird than if you do it as like an insult. It's weird if you give it based off of like a cute little thing that they do. Like, pick a reason why that nickname is applicable and make it feel slightly less awkward by giving it some substance. Like,
Yeah, well, yeah. You know, with Derek, I was trying. You remember when I was trying to play with the idea of a nickname? I just couldn't make it work because all I was getting was like Rek or Derek.
But
I
the
think
thing is,
like there was a list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, especially like when it comes from like a bullying place, so difficult. Like, but I think that it's like, okay, to use this is a stupid example because it's obviously, but in Divergent, I think his name is Peter or something. This main guy who, the main character, he calls
He's
her
called
like,
Full, isn't he?
no, this is like the evil one who ends up being on their side. But
Oh, I cannot remember. It's been a
he
long
calls
time
her
since
like
I read Jack.
stiff, and the reason he calls her stiff is because she's from Abnegation, which is this. They're supposed to be super modest and like. So he's like, you're basically like a stiff, like a dead body, like very awkward, you know. You haven't had a relationship at all. You haven't.
Just see what. Speaking of names,
Oh,
yeah. No, I just needed. Before I forgot, I need to send you. I needed to send you that. That is exactly where I got the name from. Anyway, right, sorry, what were you saying?
I think that's the thing. Like, names come from a lot of places. He calls her stiff because it's an insult, and it's an insult that makes sense. It's slightly creative. It's not just him saying that she's like a prude. It's him basically insulting her with that by saying something different. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is like with your nicknames, obviously again, mine's a first draft, so it's still very rough, but he calls her Bat because he is in a weird place mentally where he wants to kill her, but he can't because he's not the kind of person that likes killing. That's not a spoiler, that is a huge part of his character. And so he calls her Bat because he is nervous, he is annoyed, and she is annoying him. And he calls her Bat in his second language, his language that his father has always spoken, that he has learned from his father, because it's like a thing that he does to break the tension. It's not supposed to be cute, it's not supposed to be this thing yet, but it's one of those things where like eventually she will come to love him, she will come to love anything that he calls her because it will be out of love. And so like, if you have that be the case, I think that you can get away with the cringy nicknames, maybe. I think nicknames are a huge part of speech. I think that the way that you call people, it has to feel genuine, otherwise the rest of the sentence, people are just going to be like, what was that nickname? And it doesn't matter how good your speech is if the way that they call each other is unnatural, because that's a part of speech, basically. I guess, do you have any last minute tips for people before we end?
I am, yeah, basically just in your first draft, just write what you want to say, because I think that is the only way you're going to get out what you want the characters to say in that moment. But then when you come to edit it, you need to change it. So yeah,
Yeah.
just writing dialogue is hard, but you get better at it. But
Yeah.
also listen to real conversations, listen to how people speak, listen to
Yes.
what people talk about.
Watch TV shows and make a note not just of the good dialogue that feels natural, but make a note of why the bad dialogue feels unnatural.
Yes, so I just wanted to go back to this because I forgot. You know when you were talking about the quips and stuff?
Yes.
I believe it's been called the Marvelization
Oh my god,
of
yes.
literature because Marvel is known for using really quick quips,
But
which
people
I
don't
think
talk
worked
like that.
originally. Yeah, it worked originally, but now it's a bit. I think it really works in films like Guardians of the Galaxy.
It worked in Marvel films because the Marvel characters, not all of them did that. It was
No,
like
but now they all
Tony
do.
Stark, for example, he would use a few, but it would feel like these people were friends. They knew each other quite well. When you're doing quips, it shouldn't be back and forth every single conversation. And when you're thinking about it, if it takes you more than like 2 days to be thinking of a fun quip, maybe your character would have taken a little bit too long to think that up for it to be natural in conversation. Like if you think something up, obviously feel free to edit it to make it more snappy, but don't be spending a really long time on worrying about fast dialogue because it just comes across as like you trying to show off that you have these fun characters with witty banter, like and it's so even just like the phrasing of that is so cringy to me. And I think it's just one of those things that it's become like a selling point in romantasy, especially where it's like, oh, the characters are so witty, and it's like, no, they're not. It's just people having conversations thinking that they're clever. Like that's the way that it comes across to a lot of people. So I don't know, I guess don't try too hard. Think about what's natural, think about what's not natural, study conversation. There's also, do you know what, there's a book, let me get it up.
Why are you doing that? Right, I was looking up for nicknames for Derek, right? This is a list. Dare, Dal, Rick, Deek, Dalboy. Is that what his flipping name is? It's Derek.
Oh my god.
Is that what his name is?
I mean, Del Boy's...
I always thought it was like Dal or something. No, it's Derek, apparently. Hang on. Only Fools and Horses. I mean, I only watched it a few episodes in now.
I only know him as Del Boy, I'll be honest now. It would make more sense if it was Derek than Daryl.
Yeah, his name is Derek.
Incredible.
Oh my god, wow, I never knew that.
I am
Apparently Derry, Grey's Anatomy, McBastard. Because, you know, Derek in Grey's Anatomy, McBastard.
I don't like him.
I've never watched it.
I watched it and then I got bored at like series 3. Oh my god, this is annoying me. There was a book that I saw lately that was like about writing dialogue. I mean, there's quite a few. So, okay, there's a book called The Dialogue Thesaurus for fiction writers, which there are quite a few. There's like emotional thesauruses. Everyone be proud of me for saying thesaurus and not thesaurus, which...
Is it called The Art of Verbal Action?
I honestly don't know. I thought I had saved
The Writer's
it.
Guide to Authentic Dialogue Scenes.
It might have been that. Because I have a few books. There's also, I would say, you could read books about screenwriting and plays, because crafting dynamic dialogue, that's what it was. Yeah, that sticks out to me. Which, the only way to buy it is on Amazon, because I think it's secondhand. But you can probably find it better. It was published by Penguin, and it says that it's the absolute best writing instruction that WD, don't know who that is, Writer's Digest, has to offer on dialogue. There are essays, articles that overcome issues with pacing, suspense, conflict, and using dialogue and jargon, manipulating mood, developing themes, blah, 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 blah. So basically, I would say, like, obviously it's more expensive, but you could look into actually getting books on craft. So yeah, basically just do authentic dialogue. Sorry for how messy these, like, little tips have been. We're so bad at this sometimes. Mostly me, but...
Yeah, the podcast is supposed to be, like, waffly.
Yeah. That's true. You know what? I'm not going to feel bad about rambling on a podcast with rambles in the name. Yeah, thank you.
That was the whole idea, remember?
Yeah, let's be kind to ourselves. So,
Yes.
you've heard our tips, okay? And you can, well, in a few months, you'll be able to actually read Becky's book.
Yeah.
And see
And
firsthand.
I can't wait if this person gets back to me about this bookshop.
Yeah. Trust that we will be doing a full deep dive on the book.
Oh yeah.
It'll be a special
That'll
episode.
be a special. That's gonna be it's gonna be a really special episode.
But yeah, so we hope that you enjoyed learning about how we write dialogue, the things that we don't love. I feel like I harped on a lot about the nicknames thing, but honestly, it's like how Katniss calls Prim Little Duck, I think. Like, that makes sense because she's, like, talking to her young sister. And then, like, in comparison, imagine someone saying that to, like, their love interest. It would just be a very different vibe, you know?
My little rubber duck. Oh my god, I feel horrible with myself for coming up with that. Anyway.
But yeah, I think that
Hey, I can be quick. I'm very quick-witted sometimes.
see, I just think that nicknames are so fun because sometimes you come up with a terrible nickname and it sticks. So don't take all of our words to heart, obviously, but maybe just have a see over, see if they apply, and hopefully this was interesting. I feel like we did go on a big ramble, which is normal, but also, oh god, I always feel worried at the end that we've gone over stuff and then not come back to it before we finished.
I wouldn't worry, but yeah, thank you for listening, and we will be back next week.
Bye.
Bye.